Beating the Edgelord out of someone in 20 minutes. Just started the second campaign with the group, and I kid you not. Relatively new player, only played a barbarian previously, just started his new ranger, and introduced them in the following way.
He sits in a corner with his bandana over his mouth, hiding his true identity. He watches everyone with a brooding intent, working out each of their weaknesses. He lifts the bandana and takes a sip of his drink, still not revealing his face. He talks to no one.
Meanwhile, rest of party set up on a table in the middle, ignoring the creep in the corner, and start role-playing. Suddenly, a commotion comes from outside, and we go to investigate, leaving broody MC Broodson to his corner. We mosh the critters causing the commotion, then he appears without getting involved and says,
"Why didn't you call for me?"
"We didn't know you were there. You were sitting in the brooding corner. Thought you were a pile of dirty bandanas." He's better now and actually engaging in the game. Everyone wants to be Aragorn, and somehow forget that he's the one who approaches the hobbits instead of waiting for them to ask him about his super cool, edgy backstory.
They don't know about my dark past, the lives I've taken, all the crimes I've committed. They don't.
Yes, we do. You never fucking shut up about it. We can hear you in the corner. You talk about it every day. My name is Jacob Crowe, and welcome to the Crow's Perch. In today's story, we are going to be talking about Edgelords. It's been a while since we talked about Edgelords on the channel, so consider this a primer. An Edgelord is what happens when someone tries to replicate a dark or intense character, but they have no idea what they're doing. And so, in an effort to make the next Geralt of Rivia, Batman, or Mandalorian. Hey, you guys notice how all these characters are basically single dads learning how to raise a kid? Anyway, what they make instead is an annoying dolt whose personality is about as shallow as a puddle of mud, who usually tries as hard as possible to talk about how mysterious they are while simultaneously never saying anything. They also usually have tragic backstories and never trust anybody, which is funny, considering they're going to be joining up with a party of 2 to 6 other adventurers for the next couple of years or so, or at least until the campaign ends. There are good edgy characters that benefit from being loners and untrusting of others, but an edgelord is anything but good. And today, we'll find out what happens when an edgelord falls in love. So, without further ado, let's gather up in the darkest corner of the tavern in unholy matrimony as we gather up a murder and dive right into this story. This story happened 2 years back. I was invited alongside a few other people on a West Marches server into playing in another resident of that server's homebrew campaign he was putting together. I eagerly accept, and I begin playing with other people from the server, with whom I had at least some experience playing with before on the original West Marches server. Everyone made relatively well-adjusted characters, but the problem player of this story was Edge. Edge was your typical dark, brooding tiefling rogue, with a tragic backstory that he would constantly refer to, but never talk about when asked about it, which wouldn't be so bad if he didn't oh so obnoxiously bring it up every session. It was honestly the sort of edgelord character you hear about, but never think you'll actually encounter. The other important character in this story is the other tiefling of the party, a bubbly tiefling bard. She too, like Edge, had a dark backstory, where her character had faced ostracization and bullying by her noble father, but had overcome it and chose to see the good in life, rather than letting the bad she'd faced sour her. For my own part, I was playing an optimistic human fighter who cared deeply for his comrades and always sought to do the right thing where he could. Both she and I had great rapport in and out of character, and our characters bounced off one another really well. The campaign goes smoothly, albeit with Edge still being obnoxiously edgy all the time. And at one point, we encounter Bard's noble father, who's hosting a tournament. After bullying Bard, and making several remarks pertaining to her infernal heritage, my character decides to enter the tournament to beat her father, managing to unhorse him during a joust and humiliate him at his own tournament. Following this, Bard messages me saying that her character really admired how my fighter stood up for her, that no one had ever really done that for her character, and asked me if I'd feel comfortable with our characters entering into a relationship. Now, I'm usually not a fan of romance in the games I run or play in, as it can be quite awkward and uncomfortable. This was the one exception, however, as the romance my fighter had with Bard felt very organic and not awkward at all, which was further helped by the good rapport she and I already had with one another out of character. Following this, Edge's behavior begins to get worse, and he becomes noticeably more terse in-game, going off on his own constantly, saying that his character needs to be alone, and then getting upset that no one would follow him to see what was up. Which, again, he brought on himself by knocking us back all the other times we'd done so. Additionally, in combat, his character would stick close to Bard, instead of trying to solo monsters to protect her, which only made these fights harder, because she was far from the front lines anyway, and he wasn't doing as much damage as before. After a few weeks of this, Edge invites Bard and myself to join him in a secret voice chat. We do so, and the first thing that comes out of his mouth is that he'd called the meeting to talk about our characters' awful and out-of-character behavior. We were both confused about what he meant by this, and he dances around the subject for a bit before outright stating to Bard, "Your character should be dating mine, not his." According to Edge, since both he and Bard were playing tieflings, and they both had dark pasts, that it would make sense that they both would be interested in one another, and that Bard and myself had clearly missed all the setup he'd been putting down for that. I have literally no idea what the flock he was talking about, unless he thought brooding and going off on his own all the time to be alone was a substitute for flirting. He then finishes by saying that he's willing to give you both a second chance, and that this was a role-playing game, and we ought to be role-playing our characters correctly. I had to mute myself at this point, as I was laughing my tail feathers off at the sheer audacity, self-entitlement, and thirstiness of Edge, while Bard told him that her character was romantically interested in my fighter because he was a good-natured guy who stuck by his friends, through thick or thin, and didn't let bad things get him down, while Edge was miserable all the time, and was always feeling sorry for himself. Of course she'd want to date the character who actually made her happy to be around. Finally, she finishes off by saying that neither of us owed him an explanation at all, and that we could roleplay our characters however we wanted, and that if he didn't like that, he could leave whenever he liked. We both left the call, and told the DM what happened while Edge posts a message on the server saying how hurt and sad he was, that we couldn't be adults about this, and clearly weren't taking the game seriously, and left the server. This would have been the end of it, until Bard and I got booted from the original West Marches server by the mods for bringing drama to the group. We later learned that Edge had spun things so that it sounded as though we had flaunted our in-character romance and bullied him out of the group, when he left of his own volition. After complaining to one of the mods about this, who was his friend, we were booted from the group. There is something of a happy ending, though. After finding out what had happened from us both, our DM and the rest of the party left the West Marches server, but not until after the DM set the record straight to the entire server and explained just how shifty Edge had been, and what really happened. The resulting fallout had the mod that kicked us and Edge kicked from the server, and a bunch of other people leaving as well, rendering the server a shell of its former self. Not sure if it's still up. As for Bard and my fighter, they eventually got married and raised a family together in a nice, happy household and life. TLDR, Edgelord gets jealous of in-game relationship and demands we break it up for proper roleplaying. I don't know why she wasn't into you, Edge. You walked off by yourself constantly, creepily orbited around her character without saying anything to her, and immediately got jealous when she talked to another dude that wasn't a complete drain to have a conversation with. Look, I don't do relationships with my characters often, but if I could give you some advice, if one of your moves doesn't help you get laid in real life, it probably won't help your D&D character very much. Another edgelord, who was all edge and no point. Rest in turmoil, sweet prince. Anyway, those were today's stories, and these were my thoughts, and I'd like to hear what you guys have to say about today's stories in the comments down below. Also, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss a weekly dive into r/RPG horror stories here on the Crow's Perch. And before we sign off today, we're unfortunately going to be skipping Art of the Week this week to make an announcement about the next art challenge. I originally asked you guys to vote on a poll for the next theme, and you guys picked Edgelords. Kinda fitting for today's video. So this week I challenged the artists on the Crow's Perch Discord to draw the crow and one of your characters as edgy badasses that totally aren't lame or insecure at all. Bonus points if you draw them sitting in a corner brooding. Good luck out there, artists, and I can't wait to see what you come up with. You too can join by signing up for the event on the Crow's Perch Discord. Link in the description down below. Also, a special thank you to my patrons.
Welcome to the Burb aristocracy. And the first of our Birbs, I'd like to introduce you to Reuven Gritters. But let's not just stop right there. Of course, we have to mention our counts of Quills, like Gibber-Woods, King Drazil, Christian Pipp, Cosmosis, Kooky Spooks, Rykis, Mexican, Haley Thompson, Zerofang, and Netscape Navigator.
But of course the aristocracy is not complete without its barons of Beaks, like Gintahl, Jester King, Wormy, Misfit, WhoAmIAgain, Matthew Mulqueeny, Den of the Drake, McYeetly, and Anja. Now if you're done fawning over those barons, you forgot to mention the Dukes of Feathers, like Rogue the Cleric, Henna, General Constantine Chase, Happy Rex, Stevie, Doc Salty 96, and of course, Acroth. You too can help support the channel by becoming a patron on the Crow's Perch Patreon. Link in the description down below. And with all of that out of the way, I will see you next time as the crow flies.